Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. This is the CJ's book series. And we are on the chapter on the necessity and the impossibility of comprehensivity. So the format is very simple. First, we'd love to hear your comments on the essay. You can please be brief, about 2 minutes each. Make your comments. You'll have plenty of time to talk about this later on. Okay, so that's part number one. Part number two, everybody is welcome to make a presentation on any aspect related to the essay for 5 minutes. If you'd like to make the presentation, you can just say present or something like that in the chat, so we all know. Okay, and then we will have a general discussion. So that is the format. All right. So Marissa, if you could, I'm going to step away for a minute or two. If you could go ahead and moderate and get the thing started on the comments of everybody. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would.
All right. Well, folks, welcome. I have my chat open. Go ahead and type exclamation if you want to start us off. We're looking this week is the necessities and impossibilities of comprehensivity. First up, I have Richard. Go ahead, Richard. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, it was clicking on mutes and unmutes and chat. But it's nice to be here, and I got very intrigued with the whole question of necessities and impossibilities, and reading some of the documentation, and also watching the video that was done some time ago. And so what intrigues me in terms of how I've been using Bucky's thinking over the years in my practice of suicide safer living and in developing conceptual models for social work is this whole idea of the concepts of comprehensiveness, that big picture, and comprehensivity, both from the point of view of the paralysis issue and the question of the practice of comprehensivity. And so just to kind of start it off, I had the experience of saying to myself, we have to figure out a way to combine systemic pattern networks with systematic process moving forward. So I suppose in Bucky's concept, it's sort of like, how do you put noun and verb together in a way that you get that wider or deeper understanding and you can move something forward. So I got involved in doing what I would call comprehensive conceptual frameworking that combines systemic with systematic. And it took a long time to try and figure that out. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I've got quite a lot of notes about the questions that CJ was talking about on the film, and some interesting observations in terms of even the language of analysis that he talked about. And that, for me, always triggers, every time I hear the word analysis, it triggers in me the reverse of Fuller's thinking. And that is, it's part to whole thinking instead of the whole to part thinking. And the paralysis issue is if we keep trying to learn as much as possible, we're really trying to put all the parts together so we can finally say they add up to the whole. And that, of course, is not only paralytic thinking, it's incorrect thinking from Bully's point of view, or Bucky's point of view. It's more trapped into the concept of the whole is equal to the sum of its parts, instead of the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So that's just some introductory thoughts and comments from me. And I'm here in Calgary, Alberta, so it's bringing in the northern aspect from Western Canada.
Thank you, Richard. It's lovely to have you here. Feel free to put your hand up again if somebody says something that spurs you to share some more of the things you have written down. We'd love to hear them. Thank you. And next up, I have Joe. Hi, Joe.
Yeah, no, I mean, for this essay, going back over it was actually, I think, an enlightening aha moment for me. Specifically, you can start to see how tightly knit the essays are actually, that CJ, how he planned them out, and the common threads between all of them. And so for the idea of actually the importance of having a framework for understanding the world, and the questions that he poses, how to go about knowing is, one of those questions that I wish had been posed at a younger age. Even not only how to go about knowing, but how do we know even what's right to do? So I think that that's his and I have a little presentation for that, but a little bit later. But I think in a way he's providing us a framework that a lot of different philosophies actually have used, with whether how metaphysically we look at the world, and how we look at the world ethically, and how we look at the world, how we go about knowing. And but contrasting that with that, there's an inherent contradiction with comprehensivity, that you're never going to be completely comprehensive, and highlighting which I thought was really captured well in the design way. But I really think CJ was able to extract from the design way and put his perspective on it, the different the limitations of things, of what we're not going to know. And that's an important, when you're talking about trying to be comprehensive and taking a comprehensive approach, it's a framework. You'll never really achieve it. So understanding that and understanding the limitations and the impossibilities is essential, because otherwise you'll be, as one of the categories had stated, is you'd be caught up in analysis paralysis. So I think that one of the other things is, just really quickly, looking back at these essays, I realized how he was able to synthesize a lot of the information that was in the design way in a very concise way that was actually digestible. So I very much appreciated that, because I've gained a new appreciation for the book overall by going through this essay. Not this, but his essays again. And you can see how it's also foundational to other ways of thinking, meaning how to refine our judgment. What exactly does that mean? And so, yeah. So anyway, those are my impressions from the essay. I think that it was one of those essays that linking it to the first two, and actually just reading some of his subsequent essays again, it's become a little bit more clear this time around. And as Doug Jacobs had said to me, there's a gestation period. So I think that that's a good way of looking at it. Anyway,
thank you, Joel. Thank you. Next up is going to be Jeannie, followed by Maritza. Folks, would love to hear from you. What you thought of the essay? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Also, please volunteer for presentation. So far, we have Joe. Richard, would love to have you present anything that you want connected to comprehensivity for 5 minutes. But anybody else wants to present, you're welcome to do that. Just let me know. You can send me a private message or a public message. Next up is Jeannie. Jeannie, go ahead.
I think part of the necessities is situational. So CJ would have dealt with this in terms of, where you are on your personal path, but sometimes things, hit you over the head, and it's absolutely necessary to start, understanding what's going on. So, and also, things in the news. So all of a sudden, people are talking about the history of Gaza. So you have to start, thinking about that rather than other, maybe you were reading something about, ancient Rome, but all of a sudden you're thinking about Gaza because it's a situational thing. And also these situations can sometimes, make you have to make a decision, have to make an action ahead of when you might actually be ready to do that. So the situation can be very important in this, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Next up, Jeannie, would you like to make any presentation today? Yes? Okay, very good. Thank you. Next up is Maritza.
So interesting, like Joe, this section did bring to me a lot of the things we studied together with the design way. What spoke to me most was that in the section here where he talks about the implications for the practice of comprehensivity, he speaks of the paradox of that lies at the heart of everyone's practice of comprehensivism. He says, is the creative source of its genius. And I just thought that was a beautiful way to shake ourselves out of our analysis paralysis. So he says, we can come to know anything. And, the idea that if we can let go of the fact that we can learn anything to its culmination or to its perfect ending, if we let that go, then we can enjoy the learning process. That's what I hear there. He said in the same sentence, he says, okay, not same sentence, same little section, he says, simultaneously, our profound and inescapable ignorance will forever remain palpable, reminding us to stay sober and humble in our assessments. And I think I think one of the beauties of striving to live comprehensively is that you almost can't do it without a sense of humbleness. Like the more you endeavor to learn something, and if you're truly trying to go deeper and broader, there's always another level. There's always another level down, another level over. And in knowing that, it kind of makes it impossible for you to get too puffed up with your own importance because you're seeking, because your mindset is that you don't want to reach the end. So if you don't immediately see where you can go one level deeper, you're going to seek that out. You're going to seek somebody who can show you that deeper level. And I think that constant striving is where the humbleness comes up. And, he ties that in to tell us that perhaps that judgment is the key to our effective practice. And I think it feeds into that idea that we're looping around in an iterative learning process where we go down, we go out, we go down, we go out. We have to constantly judge how deep we can go before we must pause and go wider and then go deep some more. And so the way he puts it there, it kind of just seems like it's a great sounding board for whether or not we are within the path of practicing comprehensively. Like if you took a book and you just studied something in the book and you're like, oh, I'm done. I've learned everything there is to know about quantum physics. And you say that because you learned from one book. Well, then now there's no judgment of if you've gone deep enough. There's certainly you haven't gone broad enough. And now you're falling off of this iterative dance, which is the goal of what we're doing, right? We have to be light and kind of dance and keep coming around to it and hoping to learn more. Um, I I liked so he alludes to judgment here, and with him we did a really deep dive into judgment, and he invited us to embrace the concept of judgment from the design way. And I'm not going to read that here, but what I like about it is that it's design judgment. It's not just judgment. He's saying design judgment. So again, it's like if you are moving with intention, then it just kind of it seems it almost makes me like smile as I think of it because it's almost like in a giddy way. It naturally falls into place like the necessities, right? You have to have these elements. And you're not even it's not like you're very rigidly saying, oh, let me go grab this little bit of judgment here and let me grab this. If you are truly seeking this path or winding yourself along, you kind of find that you've picked it up. And like, I guess you ever find yourself kind of doing something, you're talking and they're like, where did that pen get in my hand? You needed the pen. So you grabbed it without thinking about it. It was just a natural flow for you to grab it and keep moving. I think that's the necessities part, but we don't have to view the necessities as this unbearable burden. I don't think that's what, CJ is trying to point out to us. He's trying to point out that we walk with both sides and it is a paradox, but that's okay. And we're just going to keep dancing in between it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Maritza, would you like to make a 5-minute presentation sometime during this?
I don't have a presentation planned today. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, you've been doing so many presentations, so everybody is welcome to make a presentation. And if you think of something, you're welcome to talk. Next up is going to be Robert, followed by Bob. Robert.
Never can find the right button. Kind of picking up on what both Maritza and Joe were talking about, the comprehensivity for me is it's not finite, it's infinite, and it's indeterminate. So when you are striving to know and convert that to action, you also have to understand what you're trying to know so you can move into action. But it's kind of like football. Say you're down on the 10-yard line and the game, every time you make a play, you get half the distance to the goal line. But you're never going to win that game. And if you're playing football to win, you don't like that game. But if you're playing football for the game, you love that game, even though you know you'll never win, but you won't lose, but you'll play. Well, you might lose, I guess, depending on what the score is. But the joy and the return you get is from the action. So you use comprehensivity to gain the information that you need to know more. Obviously, that's pretty straightforward, I think. but it's also without limit. And you have to deal with finite situations, which is where the judgment thing comes in that Maritza was talking about. Systemically, you've got to bind the system. You've got to create a boundary, a porous one for sure, but you have to say, we can't know everything. We have to stop here, and we make that judgment with design judgment in design. But in life, you have many things that are creating that boundary for you. There's constraints and rules and regulations, and I'm too busy and so forth. But you work within that limitation and sweep in from what you're learning along the way. And everything that you do within that context changes it. It's the sum of being greater than the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. The parts contribute, but they also disturb, they change, they make the situation different. So you have to constantly be adjusting, both in life and when you're purposefully pursuing an outcome or playing the half the way to the goal line football.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Brian and Penny, sorry I missed you. So it's going to be Brian and Penny next, followed by Bob.
I just wanted to offer a few thoughts when I had read this essay, and especially about the first part about the necessities of comprehensivity, and kind of the three major aspects he talked about, like that, what's the proper way of knowing, and leading, what's the proper way of acting, and then what's the proper way to manage the world. And as I was thinking, I was thinking back on my public education. So I said, okay, let me think about this in terms of my public education. And I feel like the first step they did try to address, kind of like a systematic approach to learning, because as you progressed in school, the subjects got more difficult, the subjects more complex. And they did try to present an array of subjects, math and English and science, languages, art. And then second one is about the proper way of acting, that, to be able to act properly in the world, you have to have a good basic understanding of the world. And I feel like, looking back, I think that was something that they were trying to achieve. But sometimes I feel kind of like they left out some kind of practical knowledge that would have been helpful. Later, I went back. I was in banking many years, and I went back and I was teaching just some classes, in high schools about finance and loans, basically, and the basics, of investing or something like that. And I felt like they had absolutely not received anything like that, which in the world we live in is some knowledge that really you need to be able to properly handle the world. And then thinking about the third thing, which was talking about managing the world's systems, to be able to comprehend and service the world as a total, the spaceship Earth vision. I mean, to me, that was totally absent. That there was a feeling that we were being tried to taught kind of the different fields of knowledge. We're being able to taught how to act in the world. But the fact that we were going to act on the world and that we might actually need knowledge to be able to manage and handle situations, I just felt like that was something that wasn't in my education. I don't know if it's included now, although of course, what I hear, is that like they're taking subjects away, which seem like they're really absolutely necessary to be able to act effectively in the world and to have a knowledge about it. But I thought that was interesting because as the world has gotten smaller, with all the communication, you really feel like there's a necessity to address this so that the average citizen has some idea about how to live in the world, and can't leave it all up to the politicians, I can tell you that. Anyway, those were my thoughts.
Thank you, Penny. Next up is going to be Bob. Bob, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if I can summarize. I'll try to keep it under 5 minutes. In 2000,
give me just a second. Now we are moving on to the presentation phase, and Bob's is the first presentation.
In 2010, I wrote an essay called 6 Tools for Understanding. And I mean these tools to be elementary, and they apply to any topic whatsoever. I'll just list the tools and then I'll give a sentence for each one. They are perspective, translation, distance, motion, fuzziness, and hierarchy. Now, let's see if I can give a sentence for each one of those. Perspective, everyone looks at things in certain ways. We may look at CJ, but everybody has a different perspective on it, and we have our own truths. This is a permanent, okay, never mind. Translation is a view where you look at somebody else's perspective and then you look at your own, and theoretically you can match them up. There's an imperfect translation between the two. Distance, that's the third tool, is the way we look at anything. There is always a distance involved. If you want to understand what's going on in China, you're going to have more difficulty than in the United States, because we don't understand the Chinese culture, even though it made the same topic. Motion is another way, is the sixth tool. And motion, often the things that we believe in are rigid, dogmatic, and we see them as fixed. This is not quite the case. Things change, and we can look at all the ways that one different thing can change. Fuzziness is the second last tool. We may strive for clarity and understanding, but in theory it is impossible. Everything is theoretically has a degree of fuzziness. That's too bad. The last one is probably the most difficult to understand, and it's called hierarchy. Hierarchy as a tool for understanding has two directions. One is analysis, and I guess we all pretty well understand what analysis is. You take things apart and you look at it and try to understand that way. The other way of looking at hierarchy is that everything has a context. The world is constructed, if you think about Russian dolls, no matter what topic you're addressing, there is a context for it. And that itself has a context, and that itself has a context. Okay, how many minutes is that? I think I did it under 5. Thank you.
Yes, you did. Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much for bringing this in and putting this on the table. All right, folks, so you're welcome to either, if you have comments, don't comment on any presentations at this stage. Go ahead and put forth your own presentation. Or if you have not had a chance to comment on the essay, you can do that as well. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark to either make a presentation or comment on the essay if you have not already done so. Next up is going to be David.
That came up fast. Thanks. I guess this is a reaction looking over the paper. It might take more than 2 minutes because he said a lot. So
please, you can take up to 5 minutes. We are in the zone of presentation, so you can do that.
in the big zone. So I looked at CJ, the way he developed the idea of the possibility and the necessity and possibility. And so he argues that what should we do? Should we rely on what we learned first? No. Should we speculate and pick one and find a favorite way of looking at things? Try a few? No. So incrementally, he suggests we should be expanding our horizons. And yeah, I think we can all intuit that that seems the best approach. But he says systematically, and he throws that in. And I think I want to take a little time to chip around that, and see what's in that word systematically. So, because that's important. And he has laid the paper out in 3 sections, as was mentioned, kind of theory, your knowledge and epistemology, your practice, and then seems like more practice, the managing and operating procedures that you use towards problems. And the question remains, as I'm reading this, is this about individuals striving for competency and comprehensivity in their own actions, or about groups, which is sort of a really expanded problem, and it goes more to Sandusky's book and Robert's book, and projects among people who are interactively, of course, individuals, but it's a different problem maybe than the individual question. So CJ goes first to the point of knowing, the theory, and I would agree. I think every system, cultural systems, kind of are entailing conceptual framework. We're trying to get into a conceptual framework and see how that fits the world for us and what we can learn working within that framework. And if we feel uncomfortable, expand it perhaps, right? So this concept building is sort of the action, we might use the term logos, right? We're looking, what's it built of? The elements, things that are made distinct here in this system, how many colors of snow in this system and how many subatomic particles in this system, the clarifications that are used in this system for explaining, explicating life or reality that it's examining and making decisions about. So, and finally, the logic of how it justifies things. And that's sort of the high level above it all, the criteria. What is evidence and reasoning for this tribe we're in here? What constitutes its own self-knowledge? And this is where I say there's this level, which is critique or self-critique or self-knowledge. So as you're reasoning, are you doing that too? Or are you just learning the system? Or is it a critical learning? So I think he hasn't made that exact distinction yet, but just saying we should be comprehensive is already going to the critical realm. So let's be explicit about that. Okay, so my suggestion on how to do systematic comprehensivity would be to say, first of all, some systems are structurally different. Some are philological and put together empirical groups of things and learn about, like, the types of birds or the layout of the trees of life, systematizing sense data, empirical evidence, and, sort of making sense of it. But that's different, to me, a little less effective as far as reasoning than the second type of system, which is sort of logic-based, principle-based, a structural or mechanical system which contains causal grounds and explanations of that sort. So that, to me, is a different kind of system. So an evolutionary-based view or a genetic-based view of phyla and associations, chemical and physical processes as the basis for explaining, as opposed to just the overt phenotypical obvious observables. So this is sort of a hierarchic way of looking things. And to me, it compacts how powerful that system is. It makes for more powerful systems. And I think that is what I would call structurally a better system. So why? The systems define their own scopes. It won't deal with something out of the scope. And it can even claim to be comprehensive, but of what? You sort of know its boundaries. Second of all, it has clarity, and its presuppositions, because it's running according to rules, they're sort of explicit. So you know when something comes up against it, you are dealing with something new. And your deductions and conceptual dependencies are explicit. So you can see the system and see it from the outside too. So this allows you to know, oh, I'm constrained in this way. Can I break it and expand it in this way? So I think that my strategy, therefore, to be a comprehensivist would be, first of all, preserve the context when you're learning something, be in constant reflection about your own thinking process as you go through two steps. One, master primarily systems that you can commit to, dive deep pursuit of their structures and fields, get to know them. There's a Chinese saying, you can know the whole world, without leaving your farm. I mean, the struggles in other parts of the world are based on the struggles you have. And your knowledge of people is about the knowledge of all people in a certain way. So really dive into that system. Know that system so well and depths. Second, then expand. Review other things. Find the contraries and evidences that aren't in your system. And that's the dialectic. Begin to compose those into what you're learning. Systems that don't have a structure. Like when I read Chinese philosophy and Tao, it's like one thing after another from left and right. I don't see that it's built with a structure. And I go to Western philosophy, it's A, then B, C, D. Okay, so I'm going to have to take this new thing, this new tree, and every limb, I'm going to have to try to integrate it in. That's a different kind of process. But it's done with that original preserving myself concern that the rules I'm using, I apply, going out. Maybe I need to keep those rules flexible and learn again. So the last thing is, in subsuming the raw data, you're using the narratives of those new systems. You're being open and sensitive to the meanings in those systems. And that's why we talk about narratives. They really reveal what your system may not be speaking to at all. Like I just listened to a neurologist and somehow I don't feel we're talking about the moral issue. I go, well, yeah, there's an emotion there, but are we concerned about the emotions and the value of human feelings, or are we just calculating what they are? So I need the narratives from those systems in a way that's a human narrative that's spoken in that tribe. To take in those new events. So read current events. Don't just sit in your backyard, but get the newspaper and integrate that into your understanding. So you do know what farm struggles are going on in China and what they want to sell and what they don't, how they don't get to live and what they're deprived of. Because you'll understand that sitting in your garden. You'll totally understand that. So that kind of, I'll wrap up the second. The big thing was epistemology for CJ, so I'm wrapping up that section. All this is like any conceptual development process. You begin by observing and collecting, comparing, contrasting as you group and create genre. Then you can presume to distinguish things and generalize. You apply reason and get fundamental rules for understanding and cross-evaluate these until finally you can reconcile and sublate other conceptual systems too. So I think it's important to see things. My structures tend to be cause, effect, identity, and change. The essence of things and the attributes, having an orderly system to me that has room for, the pure passions. The result would be try to comprehend all systems the way CJ would say, their meanings and narratives, inclusive of all observations. The ideal is that you're maximizing the simplicity of your understanding because you've unified all their principles and thought. As you've subsumed them together, you make them personally comprehended. And that gives you the ability to think in those systems. So by simplifying and unifying their principles, your thinking and judging works within all those systems because you've comfortably made them unified and not ignored them, which is a lot, we're deciding what do we ignore and not ignore. And that's what precipitates being able to have values and meanings and interpretations that are hence the basis for action. So that was the idea, to get to action. Step 2, CJ is very brief on praxis. He says, you just have to know what's going on. And I'm not sure that's where I find the most dissonance with CJ's article. Section 2, which is just very short. CJ's objectives, you just have to have your intended effects. So it all goes back in praxis to your epistemology. I think there's something missing there. But CJ says, only this, effective action is most proper. And I say, there's something else. We need moral comprehension, not just effective. We need to know, why should I choose something to be effective? So I think that's a little bit missing in what the paper explicitly is laying out. And that ignores or leaves out, or entirely implicit, the idea of what ought we, what good is, and how do we decide what's better? So when you get to the third section, if I'll try to keep this short. Now we're up to operating, which to me, I recall we mostly talked about in groups having projects and what does it mean to assess multiple people and interest groups together. When CJ says, what we're trying to do is service, provision, and steward the ecosystem regeneratively. So the end is regeneratively. If it's comprehensive, does that mean allowing for all people to exist, maintain their systems as cooperatively as possible? Didn't quite go that far as to say that. I think that would be the most compassionate ending to that goal, to steward the ecosystem regeneratively for everybody in some way, egalitarian. There are 3 problems, he says. Paralysis in 3 ways. It's too complex for analysis. I'm not sure I believe that. Once the goals are there, then what has to be analyzed becomes finite to some degree. So you can have paralysis, but I think that the goals coming first solves that problem. The second question was about the goals. Value integration it assumes it's sort of impossible to encompass all goals, but I think human beings have a substrate that's common. So I would take him in this and say, I have a greater faith in the unity of humanity. Third, it's too complex to assimilate the full context of every system. Before we've even enumerated the systems, it's too complex. Yeah, I agree. It sounds too complex to include all the native populations, but actually, were we talking about my individual comprehensivity or group comprehensivity or the whole globe? These are 3 different questions. I think when it comes to the practical global issue, many people will be at the table. The systems have to be represented. And we have to learn many systems so we can bring them all to the table. So I think there is a kind of a hope that it isn't too complex to assimilate. So actually, when he says about operating as the 3rd goal, it's really cooperating when you take that group perspective, that how do we cooperate? He enumerates a few things I love. Admit your ignorance, keep that humility, be tenacious in pursuing, though, what you do have clarity about, be incisively clear so that the judging can be clear. And then second, manage that process. You have to manage those balances back and forth, diverging and converging on particular subjects, whether you're gathering and integrating data, which is amassing, increasing, or whether you're reducing it to principles and simplifying it. And then whether you're including or excluding sets of values and thought systems is relevant to the issue at hand. Number 4 was the big picture, keeping the big picture in context. I think, though, that that's the ultimate, because knowing the big picture is the thing from your backyard. You know what the important things are. So you should be agreeing from the beginning, and that sets the boundaries on all of those other potentially infinite processes. So I agree with a lot in the paper. I would take on certain issues in certain ways and say them differently. That's my review.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for this very detailed and really, really comprehensive review. I really like your observations, your criticisms, your just, how you summarized everything. So thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Folks would love to hear your presentations. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to present. I invite everybody to present. Next up is going to be Richard.
Thank you. I'm coming from the perspective of having read a little bit of some of what CJ was presenting and listening as deeply as I could to the video. So I'm looking at kind of three things to present on: his reference to comprehensiveness, then his pathologies of comprehensivity, and then the practice of comprehensivity. And the notes that I took around comprehensiveness was this, to include the integrity of all. And he kind of stumbled on that a little bit as to, how much all, but he came back and said, no, we should be able to include the integrity of all, even those that really are adversive, if you want, to some of our ideas. And that he wanted to look at all human integrity having to do of inquiry and actions, and he talks about aggregate of aggregates. The one thing he didn't sort of talk in that part of it has to do with a concept that has come up even tonight a couple of times around epistemology. And I have been introduced to the notion of ontology as well, and that ontology is really the worldview issue. And so it really speaks to Fuller's idea as to whether we have a worldview of whole to part, or will we have a worldview of part to whole. And that's critical in terms of how we go about doing things. So analysis, going to the pathologies, analysis right away triggers to me that is part to whole thinking. That's a very traditional kind of way of looking at things. And as he said, if we're caught up with the analysis, then there's nonstop information gathering, and we'll never figure out a way to kind of converge that. And that sort of assumes that we keep going until we have all the parts that will then allow us to understand the whole. My antidote to that is to switch the analysis part and move to whole to part thinking. That's the shift that would get us out of that kind of paralysis that he's talking about. The value paralysis, he says, he was talking about the need to integrate everyone's value system is impossible. My antidote to that is the need to find a way to house everybody's value system. And I've used the tetrahedron to try and come up with a systemic sort of way. And one of the four key points that I've put into it is reference to validator otherness. In other words, it's a place to house all the values, the beliefs, etc. And then we figure out how they impact the environment, how they impact those who are close and personal to you, and how they impact you. And you get into that sort of sixth kind of way interconnection with the basic tetrahedron. So my antidote is to go from integrate to house, and that will sort of get us out of the idea of not being able to accommodate everybody's value system. And the third one, the paralysis of holism, and again, it's expressed in the idea of you need to integrate the full context of every system, and then say, wow, boy, that's difficult, just in terms of what was being presented earlier. And so my antidote to that is to come up with a common conceptual framework that can house all of this. And I did that with a tetrahedron model so that I've got a validator other than this. Then I have what refers to me, the person, and then the personal others in my life, whether it's family, friends, intimates, and the institutional resources. And you get this basic interconnection that kind of relates to the definition of universe being the environment being everything that's not me, and universe being everything environment including me. So it's that whole picture. And then the practice of comprehensivity was taking the tetrahedral model and laying it down in a network way, two-dimensional at this point, and connecting the context of the people that you're working with or dealing with, your own context. If you're tied in with an organization, there's the context of the organization, and then you move them along a pathway through a systematic or stepwise process. So you have systemic and systematic kind of working together. And that way you can also accommodate all of the 6 motions that Fuller talks about in terms of spin and precession and orbit and in and out and expansion and contract. And you can also begin to understand how the principles of integrity, the compression and tension, can work in those systems. So that's just a way of sharing how I have tried to deal with comprehensivity using Bucky's geometric thinking and the geometric sort of modeling that can actually be put in front of somebody and say, this is how I think we've got a common conceptual framework that can allow all of these other things to surface, be manifested either individually or societally or perhaps universally. So I appreciate any comments or thoughts about looking at comprehensivity and both the understanding and the practice through that kind of lens.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Keep track of all questions or comments you have about all the presentations. After all the presentations are done, we're going to have a conversation. So you can bring up anything, you can ask any of the people, any questions, make any comments. First, let's put all the presentations on the table. I will go next. If anybody else wants to present, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. It doesn't have to be too elaborate. It can be very short. Would love to hear from many people. Let's go with Jeannie and then me. Jeannie, go ahead.
You can go first if you want, Shrikant.
Is it okay? All right. I'll
go ahead.
Okay. All right. So, I'm just focused on this point about necessity and impossibilities. So that's the only thing I want to look at. On the face of it, it looks a contradiction. But is it? Okay, it's just those terms. I'll put it in slightly different terms. It is infinite and finite. It's the dance of infinite and finite, or dance of heaven and earth, if you will, if you want to make it more poetic. We are finite creatures, and we have the ability of focusing on the infinite. We are limited creatures, and we have the ability of aspiring for universal laws which are universal, which are applicable not to just one thing, but to everything. So there is this tension in us as human beings. We are finite beings yearning for the infinite. We are in the middle. We have both those capabilities. of our mind has the infinite capacity of focusing on the infinite desire to do that in the right, if you're, if you are open to the world, you have that. At the same time, we are finite beings in our thoughts, in our feelings, in our actions. Both these are true. So we are like the symbol, if you will, ones that throw together these two different things. That's what we are as human beings. Comprehensivity is an infinite ideal. It is an ideal. Another way of, you can think of it as infinite and finite. You can think of it or bridging the finite and the infinite and finite, bridging heaven and earth, or bridging ideal and real. You don't just want ideal to dream of ideals, you want to make it real. And having made the ideal real as best as we can, we don't want to stop our pursuit of conceptualizing ideal. So the ideal keeps on, it's an infinite movement towards the ideal. And there is this loop that is continuously running from the infinite and the finite. Another angle on this is the loop that we were talking about, which also gives it a reality where instead of thinking that, oh, I'm not infinite, and saying, oh, I'm not comprehensive. Well, you're not comprehensive. You have the capacity of thinking about comprehensivity, but comprehensivity is infinite, universal, ideal. And the only way to do that is to bring the infinite into finite as best as you can, bringing the ideal into reality of your life as best as you can, bringing heaven on earth as best as you can. So that is the thing. So all the problems come from saying, oh, I want to be infinite. Oh, there is more to be done. Let me not do anything. The other part of it is that the reality of us as finite beings is that we have the faculty of the mind, which can focus on the infinite. We have the faculty of the body to transform the world for the good. And we have a heart to yearn for, to have intuitions, to get feedback that mind alone can't do. Furthermore, we are not alone as individuals doing this. All of us are doing the same thing. And all of us, the extent to which we have instantiated the infinite in us, the way in which we have done that, way in which we are comprehensivist, is different. So we have so much to learn about the infinite from each other, not just what we have. So we can learn, we can trade the products in reality. A beautiful house, many, many, many things that we create, we can trade at the level of finite. But we can also trade at the level of infinite by letting people see who you are and what you know. And that is a crucial part. We are social beings. We are individual in our drive towards the infinite. It has to come from your heart. If it doesn't come from your heart, other people, no matter what they are, doesn't help you enough. So you have to want it yourself. So it has to be an individual pursuit. And then it also has to be a social. It's the same principle. It is yes and. It is Jacob Bronowski calls man a social solitary. We are profoundly social and profoundly solitary. We have to respect both of them. Similarly, we are profoundly comprehensivist. We can be profoundly comprehensivist and profoundly practical and effective at the same time. It is the idea of macro comprehensive and micro incisive. At every point of time, it's a loop. If you just go trying to do the ideal and forget the real, you're going to lose. If you just try to do real and forget the ideal, progress in the ideal, you're going to lose. So it has to be a progress happening at both the levels together. It is not either or. It is yes and. You have to have both. The transformation of your comprehensivity will keep changing. That your ideal or your grasp of heaven or your grasp of infinite will keep changing. So will the finiteness of your life. Your life will keep changing. You will keep creating concrete things, either physical things or social things or artistic things, concrete things, which will embody that. So there is going to be growth here, growth there. So I don't see it, all kinds of problems come when you set up false dichotomies of saying, oh, I need to know everything. Well, you can't know everything. You can't, as a finite creature, you want to be infinite in knowledge. You can't. You want to get the whole, all the problems, paralysis comes from ignoring both your limitations and your strength. If you have figured out something, implement it in life. Talk to other people about it. That is the surefire way of getting away from all these paralysis, to do the full circle of, going from heaven to earth and back to heaven forever and ever. So that's how I think about this. Next up is going to be Jeannie, followed by Maritza. Jeannie.
Okay, so I wanted to, in the video, you may have noticed Shrikant's question. He says, what do the traditions have in common? And I wanted to answer that question using two things. One, the first is going to be something, this might take more than 5 minutes, but I'm going to use CJ. He's going to be speaking here.
Please take your time.
So
I think all of us are doing very well. We are being to the point. We are covering everything. Go ahead, Jeannie.
So I'm going to read something that CJ wrote, and afterwards I'm going to tell you what year he wrote it. And keep in mind that there's a lot of Bucky Fuller in here, so everything should be in quotes. And in fact, the title of the essay is also in quotes, and maybe somebody knows where this came from. It might be Jane Austen or something. There may be difficulty at the moment, but I will not lose the virtue I possess. Anybody recognize that? Okay, what is the relationship of individual values and commitments, virtue, with God? Individual virtues are inherent in being human, though people often have inconsistent virtues, let alone inconsistency within their ways. God is the integrity of action, physical, for people. For people, this is their way, their ways and behavior. In other words, what happens? And ideas, the metaphysics, values, plus the way of the universe. So human virtue is an attempt to be in harmony with the universe and with God. It is a semi-divine function of humans in universe. And he says, hypothesis. The function of humans in universe is to gather information and to solve problems, and to act physically and metaphysically with virtues and integrity. As an individual, I'm committed to do my best to honor virtues that I feel will enable humans to fulfill their purpose in the universe, which may never fully be understood. And I thought Joe would like that because I brought the virtue part into there. So anyway, he wrote that in 1992, long time ago. So I wanted to answer the other side of this is how are our traditions different? And traditions are different because some of them, well, they're all a method of solving humanity's problems, but some of them solve humanity's problems in different ways, and some of them look at our needs and desires in different ways, and some of them don't fully satisfy our needs and desires. Some are ossified to the point that they have stopped providing us with the needs that we have. So our traditions are a patchwork of things that were worked out, by various people, and some of them provide for our needs and some don't. Then I want to show you this model I made, and here's a tetrahedral model. So I'm going to use this to show McLuhan's tetrad, and I'm going to use Shrikant's terminology. Shrikant made up new words for McLuhan's words, but both of these terminologies work. And the reason they do is because this is something that is changing at all times. This is a dynamic model. So in here, you have your technology, let's say your new technology. And out here, you have your four aspects. And I want to say this before I forget, I didn't put it at the end of my thing, but the McLuhans have said, if there's a fifth one, they want to know about it. And they tried to find the fifth axis here. And if you can find one, let them know, okay? It's only the grandson at this point, but let them know. So you have enhance, displace, overextend, and retrieve. And every technology is doing these, but they do it in a dynamic way because they're affecting the environment, and the environment is affecting them, and they're affecting each other. So when one does something, the others are affected in some way. So I'll use as my example running water. So running water, it enhances, it makes life easier. Water is heavy and it's hard to get it. So it's definitely enhancing our lives. Retrieves. It retrieves from our mythic past, probably never happened, but in our imaginations. We're living right next to a stream, running water, all the water we want, just coming right next to us. Then we have a waterfall. That's our shower. We can go under there anytime we want. And then we have a nice little hot tub, which is actually the spring we're in, the hot spring. So we have these things now in our own house, that's what it retrieves from our ancient past. It extends or overextends at this point. So we're using a whole lot of water now. And, we're overusing, we're wasting. And I want to go to displace. So one of the things that displaced was the well. And the well was where people met, and especially women in the society. So that part, it's a social aspect that ends up affecting, the society around it. And there's a lot of social aspects in this. I mean, if you have running water, you're going to be cleaner, and, you can go up nice and close to somebody and all that, these are all, you smell good. So there's a lot of social aspects in here, but this thing about losing the well ended up meaning that we had things like shopping and other social institutions that try to replace it, but they don't really. So there's things that happen. I want to do the security camera. So it enhances, you're able to watch people, What does it retrieve? It retrieves the eye of God. The hope is that, you have this camera out there. It can see everything everybody's doing. Nobody's going to do anything bad because they'll be spotted and punished. So what does it displace? It displaces meeting people in public. And it displaces the peephole. So it was very cramped when you had to sit in a closet in the dark and look out a peephole to see somebody doing something. Now you can just put a camera up. So it's displaced that. Nobody's going to be using a peephole anymore. And overextends. It overextends in privacy. And it also interferes with natural relationships. Because if somebody can fall in love with somebody looking at them 15 times, somebody may be looking at somebody else with a camera, that person be totally unaware. And what ends up happening is that you end up with a relationship that's a very lopsided relationship. So these are things that we need to be aware of when we have a new technology. Now, what happens is we start developing a tradition around that technology. And that tradition keeps us from doing the things, because you get a new technology and somebody's going to try to use it as a weapon, almost number one. But you get the tradition going. No, you don't use that as a weapon. It's used as a tool, and we can use it and keep it in control. And we have something that keeps this from basically destroying us. So our traditions are coming up all the time, new traditions. We have to develop a new tradition on how to act every time we get a new technology. And my point is basically that the interactions are always changing when you have these new technologies, and that we have to somehow, manage them because we want to be safe. McLuhan himself is a fairly new tradition. And the way this happens is, he started out, and then his son took up the cause, and then his grandson took up the cause. And this really helped establish a new tradition, the whole tetrad thing. They didn't have, McLuhan, number one McLuhan, Marshall didn't even have the book out about tetrads until after, he had the help of his children. So that's why I wanted to say about traditions and new traditions. And thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. That was great. I'm delighted. I really liked your piece on the security camera, and especially the running water. That was great. Thank you. And it was just pleasure reading, listening to CJ talk all the way back, about this. So thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Maritza. Joe, go ahead.
So can I give use a PowerPoint? Are you on mute? You're on mute. I can't hear you.
I'm making you a co-host.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I will keep it fast, I promise.
You can take time. You can take up to 10 minutes if you want.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's 9:18, so I don't know if I'm going to take that much time. Really quickly, just to recap, one of the things that I had mentioned was the link that between the last essay, the first essay, you're starting to see a trend in how carefully CJ actually planned these essays out. So we've talked a lot about the philosophical frameworks. Can you hear me?
May I request that you hit the share so
yeah,
it's large enough so people can see?
Does that work?
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. So this is just going back to the previous essay and just highlighting the three areas that CJ had talked about, the philosophical frameworks, and that we have. And I'll go into that into a little bit more detail, but there are various philosophical frameworks that we've looked at here. We've looked at Stoicism, we've looked at the Bhagavad Gita, we've looked at the Gospel of John, we've looked at as well as Taoism. And all of these have their unique way of actually guiding the way we live. There are ideas and our ideals that we actually strive for. And so then that's the traditional set of ideas. Then there's the art and the material culture. And so I like the way actually DLJ actually captured it last time when he talked a little bit about the behaviors that we have and the patterns that we develop. And through this, you start to see how what technological, what architecture, what artistic works start to emerge from culture, from our what material objects actually start to manifest themselves into reality. And then lastly is the social structures and how they impact us, whether it be the family structure, the governmental organizations, the economic systems, how they all impact us, and how there is a social element to that. And that has an impact on how we perceive reality, what our values are. So from this, it starts to, I put together a little bit of a model here, and where you start to have this philosophical self. And the important thing about this particular graphic is, or in this essay specifically with CJ, is he's thinking more about this epistemologically, which is a very, very deep and important point. So let's just say you're thinking about things in terms of you've adopted, and he specifically actually highlighted Stoicism in his video, in his initial essay, and he talked about Stoic wisdom. But the way of knowing, the way you have these impressions about the world, going very deep. What is a cataleptic impression? How do I know something actually exists? Or you could be a skeptic, where you may not believe that necessarily anything, you can prove that anything exists. So what I'm saying is that the way of knowing, these are very, very deep concepts where you have to choose, and you have to think about these things very deeply, and that's the philosophical self, and that's understanding reality, and having a framework for that. And then there's the cultural and the psychology, and I map those to the ideas of the material and the social, right? And so our psychology is formed by our families, our organizations, the systems that we live in. We start to develop our values, what's really important, to us in these, based on the structures and the around us. The material culture, again, that's just coming back to the same thing I was talking about before. But the idea that you have these set of patterns of behaviors. Now, all of this is important there's the idea of the self. So you have the idea of the self, you're separate from everyone else, but then the importance about awareness within that. Being aware, that's what we kind of have all been talking about. How do I know what I want to be? The deep introspective work that you actually need to do in order to actually understand what it is that you value outside of these systems. And that's a very important point, because a lot of times, as we were just saying, I think David said it nicely, are we just going about and just existing? Or are we really questioning as to why we want something in the first place? So this is where we have our principles, and we develop our habits and our behaviors from there. Now, then there's this idea of our identity. You know, what creates our identity? What is, how do we perceive ourselves? What does it really mean to be successful? And it's one thing to look at that within a culture, and it's another to look at it independent of the culture itself. And that's a very important thing, is that that's how you really determine what your values are. You're not going to allow all the outside influence dictate what. Now, inevitably, they will actually have an impact. I'm not saying they won't, but who's dictating your values? Is it the, you know, type of education that you've had, or is it going to be, you know, is it going to be you? And so, and you can do this by in a very practical way, is, you know, what emotions arise and what circumstances, you know, and as to why those emotions may exist in the first place. So constantly questioning as to why we're reacting in a certain way. And that's one thing, you know, it's deep for me, is that, yeah, I sometimes when I react to, I'm just reacting. And maybe, you know, the important thing is to ask ourselves as to why we reacted that way in the first place. So that's, you know, just to say, this is all kind of encompassing the idea of the self. All of this has to be, in certain cases, overcome in order to not be biased by our experiences. So that understanding this, understanding our psychology, understanding the social culture, understanding the material world around us, all of this is something that we have to consider, and it's a lot. It shows you how much we're impacted by the, you know, our external world. So anyway, it's just, that's a lot to overcome. Really quickly, I stole this from Howard. Basically that and Robert, I get, well, actually, it was it wasn't directly from the design way. So it's just an idea. This is where we've been talking about the loops. And what I did is I mapped this onto Ackoff's idea and theory of knowledge. So his hierarchy, which actually that wasn't a design way. And just thinking about it in the terms of, like, if we get information, we react a certain way, who, what, when, and where. You can solve problems at an operational level, at that level. You can, you know, if, let's just say, for example, in a very practical sense, like a supply chain, something goes wrong. You can say who, what, when, where, and solve the problem in that instance. But a deeper level, the next level down, is understanding how that problem occurred. And so that would be having knowledge. It's not, you're not just necessarily reacting to the information that you're receiving. I'm not going to, I'll go a little faster here, but understanding why. That's the next level down. And I have underneath there, you know, that's how our beliefs and values and our principles. But why are we doing this in the first place? Is maybe, you know, that answering that kind of question. So, and finally, wisdom is evaluating our own judgment about a particular whatever, not a particular situation, but how we're perceiving the world. What value judgments are we making, and why are we making them in the first place? So we're evaluating our understanding. And as to your point, Shrikant, it's a loop that's constantly always ongoing. So, and that's, I don't know why it's not going. Okay. So anyway, really quickly, and most philosophies, you have physics and ethics and a logic. And so CJ asks us 3 questions, right? What is the proper way of knowing? What way or ways of knowing ought a human being practice? And what approach to learning ought we practice? So really, the essay really focuses, as David had said, on the logic aspect of things more than anything else. But this is where our metaphysics, how the world works, understanding cause and effect, his 3 questions map right directly onto these 3 areas, in my opinion. And this gives us a framework for a philosophy of life. A lot, there are actually philosophies that just have physics and ethics, like Epicureanism, but nonetheless, most philosophies actually have these 3 components, and it's just the physics, understanding how the world actually is, what are the principles that actually govern the world, how the world hangs together, so to speak. And then the ethics. This comes back to actually what is right and wrong. What are the actions that we ought to take? And so this is where the idea of being pro-social, that we're social creatures, as you had said, Shrikant, how we interact with everyone else, that allows us to actually move forward. And as you said, we're not trading material things, we're trading ideas. So pro-social means respect for the other, respecting their opinions, their ideas, their values. And that is essential to our own learning. And this is where the framework, actually, or the logic comes in. Now you have that. So I'll put underneath there is the psychology. What biases do I have? Why am I discounting someone else's opinion? Should I discount someone else's opinion? The reasoning, the formal reasoning and thinking about it. And that's where I was saying about even your impressions about the world. How do you know they're true? You have to at least have a criteria for thinking and looking at it. So this is it mapped on nicely to that. Okay, so he maps. Obviously, we've talked about this. I'm not going to go on to this in too much detail, but the idea of analysis paralysis, value paralysis, and paralysis of holism. Now, coming back to understanding the self, these are all very obvious definitions. Okay, analysis paralysis, that we think we need to know everything, but we can't possibly know everything. Values paralysis, how are we going to reconcile everybody's values? We believe understanding everything is required. It's not. But more importantly, the thing that I liked about this, and I liked about this in the design by is that if you do have analysis paralysis, if you do have value paralysis, if you do have paralysis of holism, how are you going to correct it? And you only have that by having a philosophy or an approach for knowing. A lot of people could actually suffer from these things, but they would never actually understand as to why they suffer from those things. It helps you reconcile the contradictions that exist to you internally. And that's why understanding it, having an approach for knowing, is so critical. And then you can go a lot deeper from there. I'll skip this slide because it's just, I'm just reading. So the key takeaways, I just for this particular essay, humanity is always moving towards the unknown and the unknowable. And I think that Aristotle actually captured this well. It's our curiosity. It's constant. And as you said, it's eternal in a way. We're exchanging ideas. And that to me is, it's a reason to exist. And I think that the ethics and virtue aspect of it is essential in order for us to continue to explore the unknown. The comprehensivist worldview, it's understanding, as I had said, our ethical principles, our beliefs, our values. Why do I feel a certain way in this particular circumstance? Challenging our preconceived notions of the world. And one of the things I didn't mention, and that CJ, and I can't wait till we actually go over his essay in judgment, just how deep that really is. You have your sensorial experience. You have your impressions about the world. And then are you going to assent to those impressions or not? Are you just reacting? What kind of habits do you have? And what are your beliefs as to why you reacted that way? That's what by a comprehensivist worldview is that you're actually continually learning from all the people around you from their different experiences. And that allows you a deeper understanding of yourself in that process. And that goes to the third point too. By understanding, by working together, we can actually understand both each other and the world better. And nobody did it better than CJ. As I had said in my very first, in our very first meeting, is that specifically he always made sure that people had an opportunity to share their ideas, provided a psychological safety, if you will, as Amy Edmondson would say, as to make that everybody would be heard and felt heard. And even if you were you're shy or things along those lines, he had a way of integrating and pulling the best out of everyone. So that's what he did really well. And I think that what you're now seeing is that manifest itself in these essays in this series. But most importantly, I think that you can see how deep he was thinking about these topics. Anyway, so that's just.
Thank you, Joe. That was great. Thank you for putting in all this work to put it all together. Thanks.
Putting together visually helps.
Yes, it helps. It helps a great deal.
Yeah.
Next up is going to be Maritza, and then we will go to any comments you might have on any of the presentations, any further thoughts. So Maritza, you're next.
I am all the way on the opposite spectrum of Joe's very carefully constructed presentation. I'm giving you my fly off the cuff last second idea here. As I was listening to a lot of the presentations, I got it in my mind that there's interaction. So, David started us off, with these questions, turning over some of CJ's things and saying, but how? But this wasn't addressed. So came to mind to me that we have discussed some concepts that do address this in a slightly tangential way. So what I'm wanting to put here out into the universe with you tonight is the idea of looking at the concept of comprehensivity as an individual striving towards evolving the self and constantly looping back into a flow state. We've done, we did many meetups on the concept of flow from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And so, couple thoughts is that, he describes flow as a state of optimal experience where individuals are fully immersed in an activity with a balance between skill level and challenge. this state can be paralleled with, I'm saying this is something I wrote. This state can be paralleled with comprehensivism's pursuit of integrating knowledge. So both flow and comprehensivism require a deep engagement and a continuous process of learning and adaptation. So with that said, I did seek and pull up here just one slide I want to share. This slide is from chapter 8 of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's book, The Evolving Self. This is not from the actual chapter. This is from the PowerPoint presentation that I created when we were going through this here with 5211 Ideas. And the title of this is the last page in the grouping, and it's called The Challenges of the Future. And once I share it, I'm hoping it will be evident to many why I'm choosing to put this into our memory banks for today with this topic. So, what does one have to do to experience flow and build a more complex self while at the same time contributing to evolution? If we look at that from what does one have to do to be true to the necessities of comprehensivity while at the same time acknowledging the impossibilities. So these are almost tangential, but I think that they're really good, almost basic axiomatic concepts for us to look at outside of the very high intellectual realm thought. It seems, super basic to say learn to enjoy life, right? But when you look at what we're saying here, is if you're not seeking this enjoyment, you are, and I will say, I want to preface that by saying that Csikszentmihalyi actually does spend quite some time in his book explaining the difference between seeking enjoyment and seeking pleasure. There is a difference there. And so we here together, we enjoy seeking deeper understanding. So that first line, that's where I'm tying that to comprehensivity, in that if you're just going through the motions, you're not really seeking to understand. So then you're failing in that loop of going deeper and broader. And the same thing with the idea of seeking out complexity. That's part of the whole thing, where we look at master wisdom and spirituality. I love that this is a call to internal discipline and responsibility. And Joe called these out, with more specific names specific to comprehensivity. But the different phraseology here, I think it's helpful to make us see that it's ultimately what you're doing. And the idea to invest psychic energy in the future, trust in what is to come, be eager to try out your skills on unforeseen opportunities. I think that we sometimes, even when we're striving forward to understand something deeper, sometimes something resonates so loudly that as we're going forward, we we might hold a little too tightly to a newly learned concept. Like, say, for example, if I fell in love with Harold Nelson's The Design Way, and I think it's the best thing I've ever read. Now, that's great. And that's something that's fantastic for me to have and to incorporate and to keep rereading. But if I start putting it in front of, or even as the axiomatic concept for everything else I'm seeking to learn and understand, I might be hindering myself. And I think this idea here, eager to try out unforeseen opportunities, it's the idea that you may have to put that book to the side for now. Like, let it go temporarily so that you can give yourself up fully to the concept of learning in a new way. something and then incorporate those things which you've already, integrated to some extent, because that's the way you're going to move up and to keep that forward movement. And that concept slides perfectly into this last bullet of investing in a harmonious future. I think that's what we're all doing when we're investing in comprehensivity. It's the collective well-being of all life. CJ says that slightly differently, but that's exactly what I hear him saying. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. All right. I am just blown away by all the comments and all the presentations. This is, I think, one of the, I really love this meetup. This has been just amazing. So now we go to the third phrase, where we comment on anything that has been said. We can do a second comments. Let's try to keep it brief because we're coming to about 9:45. So that we can have as many people comment. So just hit the main points that you have, and then we'll go to the next person. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like to comment on any of the presentations or anything more. It's going to be Richard followed by Julie. Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, all very interesting. And actually, my question is directed to Joe because of the presentation and the materials. There's two things which I'm kind of interested in. I made reference to the concept of ontology earlier, and I see in the list that he's got under logic that he's included epistemology, but not ontology. So I'm kind of wondering, is there a reason for that, or is there an absence of putting in something that captures the notion of worldview along with ways of knowing? And the other question is, every time I see anything that is in, say, threes, I always ask from a tetrahedral whole system, minimum whole system perspective, what about the fourth? Or why, when we come from a fuller kind of way of thinking, why isn't it a four-part kind of configuration for comprehensivity instead of just a three-part or a two-part?
Go ahead, Joe.
To the first question as to why I didn't include ontology, that was just because the essay focuses on epistemological knowing. So that from that perspective, there is an ontology that is in Stoic philosophy. So it would normally be, it's not excluded, so to speak. That was just excluded from my slides. As far as the physics, ethics, logic being a way of understanding versus the fours, actually, that we actually had a discussion about it a little bit earlier with knowing. I would only say that the Greeks didn't necessarily think in terms of fours. That's for sure. And in that sense, that there are a lot of people that kind of think that what we really need from the presentation that I had provided, more than anything, the thing that needs to be maintained is the ethics. A lot of the other ideas have been are no longer necessarily, at least as the way the Stoics thought of them, they're not as relevant as they were back then. So, I mean, to me, it also, I don't know what the fourth category would be. I have to be quite honest.
Let's ask.
I would say that what would be the fourth category in the sense that you have a physics, a logic, and an ethics? I would be interested in hearing what Bucky might actually include in that fourth category.
Richard, what would you put? What would you put there?
Well, if what Joe just said is correct, that we wouldn't know, then what the fourth would be is it would just be a category that says unknown. So you realize that yes, there's more to know. The unknown may appear and become known, so then we would have the fourth, or it may never. But because we always hold space for the unknown, we're doing what he was saying a little bit earlier, always moving towards the unknown. So it allows us to hold space for what is considered to be important, and that is to recognize that we don't know everything and that there are unknowns that may or may not surface in our lifetime or become known to anybody, but they're there.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say really quickly to that, to the fact that the Stoics relied on principles, and not just their observations of the world, actually in a way that is accounting for the unknowns. So that the didn't necessarily look at things just from an empirical point of view, strictly empirical point of view, has an element of accounting for the unknown in it. That's how I would say that it's in there, but you're saying no.
Thank you.
I'm saying if it is in there and you work from a minimum of 4, then bring it out into the open and give it a label so that you know that it's there.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's, I want to make sure that we have as many people commenting on as many things. It will be
on that issue. Can I just?
Sure, go ahead, David.
Just on what Richard said, if I think I hear what you're asking, there is a possible fourth area for aesthetic reactions, human feeling, and that area, that kind of judgment. So that is sometimes put as a fourth area: aesthetics, the relationship of the human beings to the sublime, as apart from what nature is, our connections, that connection to it. It's a possible fourth area.
Thank you.
Poetry,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, David. So, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics. Next up is Julie. Folks would love to hear from, anybody on any of the presentations or any follow-up comments. Please go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Julie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm totally new at this. I don't even know a lot of the definitions of the words. However, it seems to me that we all, as humans, process our world through some kind of paradigm, whether we are aware of it or not. I'm not sure actually that people that don't, a bunch of different paradigms or things are driving them, but those of us who are curious and want to know how things work, yeah, I do have what works best in my viewpoint of the world, and then I'll come up against something that challenges it, and I get kind of uncomfortable because it's part of my security. However, I do think it's important to put aside I think Maritza's right that it can get in the way of me seeing something because I don't want to see it maybe. So there's a prayer called the set aside prayer, which says, let me set aside everything I think I know about this and that so that I can have a new experience with something new. And also, I guess that would be what is called the beginner's mind, to always remember to keep that beginner's mind. And doesn't mean you got to throw your baby out with the bathwater, because just because something comes up and challenges your paradigm doesn't mean your paradigm's wrong. It means maybe a new variable has been added that infinite new variables come in all the time. So I don't know if we can ever get a whole look at everything because there seems to be infinite things coming in all the time. Anyway, that's my take on it. And I think that I do want to say that I think that in doing the work to find out our own paradigm, whose values are we operating off of? How many different directions are we going in at one time? To me, that's important to know. I think a lot of the people in the world are going in a million different directions. They don't even care. But I think naturally we are curious, and we do. I think it get kind of trained out of a lot of people, that curiosity and that possibility thinking. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate that. Next up is going to be Robert. Robert, go ahead.
I'll get this down to a system one of these days. I had something else to say, but I wanted to pick up on what Julie said because she's right on about social and other pressures that operate on us and keep us from doing what we not only can do, but what we're capable of. I use that term to mean what all the negatives will let us do, and what we want to do, the desiderata, is something that belongs to us and only we can share it and activate it. And then I wanted to say about the triad or the tetrahedron or the quadrahedron, or when you're dealing with systems, you set the boundary. And the boundary you set can be open or closed, and it can be malleable. So if, for instance, the characteristics of what you're talking about fit in a triad or a tetrahedron, that's fine. And if you want to turn it into a icosahedron, why not? But you discover along the way whether or not that boundary that you've set yourself, and by yourself I mean if there's a group, the group itself, that boundary is pliable if you want it to be. But if you're dogmatic and you want everything to be controlled and everything to be finite, then that boundary will become hard and impenetrable from both directions, expanding outside and expanding inside.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Next up is Jeannie. Folks, if you would like to make a comment, please go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Jeannie.
I wanted to weigh in on the idea of the fourth and of our sort of aesthetic appreciation, because I think actually most of that comes from our traditions. We don't really understand what we like until we're told what we like by our traditions, I think. So
thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Next up is Mike. Mike, go ahead.
We used some good words here. We started out with try to be comprehensive. Who can argue with being comprehensive? You want to have a comprehensive theory. The impossibility of comprehensivity, the necessity of comprehensivity. Comprehensive. What you really know, you can present as mathematical and get the numbers to be comprehensive. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, you end up with simultaneous equations from fifth grade, third grade, depending on when you learned about simultaneous equations. You could have, if you had examples of two equations and two unknowns, and you can solve those. Then you ended up with another word that we use a lot here called transcendentalism. Transcendentalism has meaning in spirituality. It also has meaning in mathematics. it means that you end up with situations where you end up with different types of numbers. When you solve simultaneous equations, some of the answers turn out to be some of the answers turn out to be imaginary. What do you do with an imaginary number? Some of the answers turn out to be periodic. You have many, many, many solutions to these things. Now, in the real world, you don't end up with two equations and two unknowns. You end up with situations with, say, 5 equations and 5 unknowns, and you can solve those even when they're cubic equations or transcendental equations involving hyperbolic sines and hyperbolic cosines. And you can solve those. But what happens when you end up with 52,000 equations and 75,000 unknowns? You can solve those too. And you find there are many, many answers. And some of those answers not only are imaginary, they may lead to multiverses. And the answers not only aren't in this world, this universe, they may be in some other universe. So I can agree with the design way that you have to reduce these to numbers in order to build a building or build a bridge. But numbers are supposed to give you not really numbers, but insight into the physical processes that those numbers represent. And sometimes that answer is not in sight. It may be there, but it may not be in our sight.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. All right, folks. Anybody else has any more comments? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. We're coming towards the end of this. By the way, I thought that this meetup was fantastic. Okay, I think this series has legs. If you just look at the essay and look at the previous video and just what I'll put this up soon on YouTube. Just the range of things that people said today. It's quite exciting. So I'm really looking forward to to continuing this. The next one is going to be 2 weeks from now. It'll be the next one in the order, and I'm planning to put together a PDF for the book very soon. And as soon as I have it, I will put it up on the Meetup pages, so you can download the entire book very soon. All right, folks. So thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you soon. Bye.